Sarah Chen had heard every joke in the book. At 5'3" and barely 110 pounds, she didn't look like anyone's idea of a Marine sniper. The men at Camp Pendleton made sure she knew it. "Hey, Chen, need a step stool to see through that scope," Corporal Martinez called out across the range one Tuesday morning. The other Marines laughed. They always laughed. Sarah didn't respond. She never did. She simply adjusted her position behind her rifle, controlled her breathing, and sent round after perfect round downrange. 500 yards, center mass, every single time. She'd been doing this for 3 years now. 3 years of proving herself over and over again. 3 years of being the best shot in her unit and still being treated like a mascot. The guys would clap her on the shoulder and say, "Nice shooting, kiddo," then turn around and tell the new recruits she'd gotten lucky. Staff Sergeant Blake Morrison was the worst of them. He was a broad-shouldered Texan with 20 years in the Corps and opinions as big as his home state. He'd made it clear from day one that he thought women had no business in combat roles. "This ain't target practice, Chen," he'd told her during her first week. "Out there in the real world, you need more than a good eye. You need strength. You need guts. You need to be able to carry a wounded man twice your size out of a hot zone." Sarah had bitten her tongue. She'd wanted to remind him that snipers rarely carried anyone anywhere, that her job was to provide overwatch, to eliminate threats before they became problems, to save lives from a distance. But she'd learned early on that talking back only made things worse. So she kept her head down and her skills sharp. She qualified expert marksman every single evaluation. She studied ballistics and wind patterns and atmospheric conditions until she could calculate a shot in her sleep. She ran the obstacle course faster than half the men in her platoon and could do more pull-ups than most of them. None of it mattered, not to Morrison, not to the others. The only person who seemed to see her for who she really was Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez. He was Navy, not Marines, but he ran joint training exercises between the SEALs and Marine snipers. He was quiet, thoughtful, and he evaluated people based on results, not assumptions. "You've got something special, Chen," he'd told her after a long-range exercise 6 months ago. "Don't let the noise get to you. Keep doing what you're doing." Those words had meant more to her than he probably knew. In a world where she was constantly dismissed, having one person recognize her ability felt like oxygen. It was early November when everything changed. Sarah was in the armory cleaning her rifle, a practice she performed with almost religious devotion, when Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez walked in. His face was tight, serious. "Chen, I need to talk to you," he said, "privately." Sarah's heart jumped. In her experience, private conversations with superior officers rarely meant good news. She followed him to a small office off the main corridor. Rodriguez closed the door and turned to face her. "How do you feel about deployment?" Sarah blinked. "Sir, I'm putting together a team for a joint operation overseas. Classified mission. I need a sniper I can trust. Someone with exceptional skills and the discipline to follow orders under extreme pressure." He paused. "I want you on my team." For a moment Sarah couldn't speak. Deployment, a real mission. This was what she'd trained for, dreamed of, worked toward for 3 years. "Yes, sir," she managed. "Absolutely, sir." Rodriguez nodded. "Good, we leave in 2 weeks. You'll be briefed on the details once we're boots on ground. This is going to be dangerous, Chen, I won't lie to you, but I believe you're the right person for this." The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation and paperwork. Sarah told her family she was being deployed but couldn't give them details. Her mother cried. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, simply hugged her tight and said, "Make us proud, sweetheart." The reaction at Camp Pendleton was predictably mixed. Some of the younger Marines congratulated her. The older ones, Morrison's crowd, were less enthusiastic. "You're sending Chen," Morrison said to Rodriguez one afternoon, loud enough for half the base to hear. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a SEAL operation. These boys need real backup, not a sharpshooter who's never seen actual combat." Rodriguez's voice was cold. "Staff Sergeant, I chose Lance Corporal Chen based on her qualifications and performance record, both of which are exceptional. If you have concerns about my judgment, you're welcome to file a formal complaint." Morrison's face went red, but he said nothing more. Still, Sarah could feel his resentment like heat coming off asphalt. The team assembled 2 weeks later at a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan. Sarah was the only woman among 12 operators, 8 Navy SEALs and 4 Marine support personnel. The SEALs were professional, focused. They introduced themselves, shook her hand, and that was that. No jokes, no condescension, just business. The mission briefing came that evening. They gathered in a secure tent as Rodriguez laid out the situation. A high-value target, an enemy commander responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces, was holed up in a compound in the mountains. Intelligence suggested he was planning something big. The SEAL team would infiltrate at night, neutralize the target, and extract. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch from an elevated position half a mile away. "You're our guardian angel, Chen," Rodriguez said. "You keep our backs clear. You spot threats we can't see. You make the shots nobody else can make." Sarah nodded. Her mouth was dry, but her hands were steady. This was it, everything she'd worked for. They moved out 3 days later under cover of darkness. The terrain was brutal, steep, rocky, cold. Sarah carried 60 pounds of gear, including her rifle, ammunition, water, and communications equipment. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached in the thin mountain air. But she kept pace. The SEAL team leader, Chief Petty Officer Mike Davidson, seemed impressed. "You doing okay, Chen?" he asked during a brief rest. "Yes, Chief," she replied, "ready to go." He smiled, "Good to hear." They reached the overwatch position 2 hours before dawn. It was a rocky outcrop with a clear sightline to the target compound below. Sarah set up her rifle, checked her scope, and settled in. The SEALs continued down the mountain toward their objective. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah controlled her breathing, staying calm, staying focused. Through her scope, she could see the compound. Guards patrolled the perimeter. Lights burned in several windows. Rodriguez's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Overwatch, this is Alpha 1. We're in position. Report status." "Alpha 1. Overwatch," Sarah replied quietly. "I have eyes on target, 3 guards visible on the north side, 2 on the south, all armed." "Copy that, Overwatch. Stand by." The minutes crawled past. Sarah's finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Not yet. Her heart beat slow and steady. This was what she trained for. Every hour on the range, every qualification test, every moment of doubt and determination, it all led to this. Then Rodriguez's voice came through again, tight with tension. "Overwatch, we've got a problem." Sarah's pulse quickened, but her voice remained calm. "Go ahead, Alpha 1. We've got additional hostiles approaching from the west. Looks like a patrol returning early. At least 8 fighters, heavily armed. They're going to spot us before we can complete the mission." Through her scope, Sarah scanned westward. There, a line of men moving along a mountain trail, armed with rifles and RPGs. They were less than 200 yards from the SEAL team's position. In minutes, they'd stumble right into Rodriguez and his men. "I have eyes on them," Sarah reported. "Range is 640 yards. Wind 3 to 5 miles per hour left to right." "Can you engage?" Rodriguez asked. There was no panic in his voice, but Sarah could hear the urgency. 640 yards, 8 targets. In the dark with variable wind shooting downhill. It was a nightmare scenario. Miss one and the whole compound would be alerted. The mission would fail. The SEALs might not make it out. Sarah's training took over. She calculated windage and elevation, adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing. Her finger moved to the trigger. Affirmative, Alpha 1, engaging now. The first shot broke the mountain silence. Through her scope, Sarah saw the lead fighter drop. She cycled the bolt smoothly, found the second target, adjusted for his movement. Breathe, squeeze. The second man fell. The remaining fighters scattered, confused, trying to find where the shots were coming from. That confusion bought Sarah precious seconds. Third target. Fourth. Each shot had to be perfect. Each adjustment had to account for distance, wind, the angle of the slope. Fifth target. He was running now, presenting a harder shot. Sarah led him slightly, accounting for his speed and direction. Breathe, squeeze. He went down. 3 left. They'd found cover behind rocks, making themselves harder targets, but Sarah had the high ground and a superior scope. She waited, patient. One of them leaned out to scan for the shooter. Mistake. 6th target down. The last 2 were smart. They stayed low, didn't expose themselves, but they had a problem. They were pinned down. They couldn't advance to the compound without crossing open ground. They couldn't retreat without exposing themselves. They were stuck. Alpha 1, Overwatch, Sarah reported. 6 hostiles down. 2 remaining are pinned behind cover, grid position November 7-3. Outstanding work, Overwatch, Rodriguez replied. Hold position. We're proceeding with primary objective. Sarah kept her scope trained on the 2 remaining fighters. 20 minutes passed. 30. She didn't move, barely breathed. Her body ached from staying in position, but she didn't shift. The 2 hostiles below eventually made a decision. They began crawling backward, trying to retreat along the trail. Sarah let them go. They were no longer a threat to the mission. Down at the compound, Sarah watched through her scope as the SEAL team moved with surgical precision. Flashbangs lit up the windows, controlled bursts of gunfire. Within 8 minutes, Rodriguez's voice came through. Overwatch, Alpha 1, primary objective complete, beginning exfiltration. Copy that, Alpha 1. Route appears clear from my position. But it wasn't over yet. As the SEALs moved away from the compound, lights began appearing in the surrounding area. The gunfire had alerted other enemy forces in the region. Sarah counted at least 20 fighters converging on the area. Alpha 1, you've got company coming from multiple directions, Sarah warned. Recommend you move fast. Already on it, Overwatch, keep us informed. For the next hour, Sarah became the team's eyes. She called out approaching threats, guided them away from enemy positions, helped them navigate the treacherous terrain in the dark. When 3 fighters moved to cut off the SEAL team's escape route, Sarah put them down with 3 quick shots. By the time the sun started to rise over the mountains, the SEAL team had made it back to the Overwatch position. They were exhausted, breathing hard but alive, every single one of them. Chief Davidson clasped Sarah's shoulder. Chen, that was the finest shooting I've ever seen. You saved our lives out there. The other SEALs echoed the sentiment. Rodriguez simply nodded at her, but his eyes said everything. She'd proven herself in the way that mattered most, when lives were on the line. The extraction helicopter arrived 40 minutes later. As they flew back to base, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She'd done it. She'd completed a real mission. She'd protected her team. But when they arrived back at the forward operating base, reality set in quickly. Staff Sergeant Morrison was there, along with several other Marines who'd been assigned to base operations. Word of the successful mission had already spread. Morrison's face was sour as the team climbed off the helicopter. He stood with his arms crossed, watching Sarah with obvious displeasure. The debriefing took 3 hours. Rodriguez and Chief Davidson both praised Sarah's performance in their reports. The mission had been a complete success, they said, largely due to her exceptional shooting and tactical awareness. When the debriefing ended, Sarah headed to the mess hall. She was exhausted and hungry, dreaming of a hot meal in her bunk. But as she walked across the base, she heard Morrison's voice behind her. Must be nice getting credit for doing the easy job. Sarah stopped, turned around. Morrison stood there with two other sergeants, all of them looking at her with contempt. "Excuse me," Sarah said quietly. "You heard me, Chen. You sat on a mountain and pulled a trigger a few times. Meanwhile, the real warriors were down there risking their lives. But sure, take a bow. Enjoy your moment." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. For 3 years, she'd taken the insults, the dismissals, the casual disrespect. She told herself it didn't matter as long as she did her job well. But this was different. Morrison was diminishing what she'd accomplished, belittling the mission itself. "I did my job," she said, keeping her voice level. "Same as everyone else on that team." Morrison laughed. Your job is to look good for the recruitment posters. They sent you out there for publicity, Chen. Don't fool yourself into thinking it was about your skills." "That's enough." Staff Sergeant, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez appeared from behind them. His voice was ice. Lance Corporal Chen performed exceptionally under combat conditions. She eliminated 8 hostile targets at ranges exceeding 600 yards. She provided overwatch that directly resulted in 0 SEAL casualties. If you have a problem with that, we can discuss it with your commanding officer. Morrison's jaw worked, but he said nothing. After a moment, he turned and walked away, his companions following. Rodriguez looked at Sarah. "Don't listen to him. You know what you did out there. So do the men whose lives you protected." Sarah nodded, but inside she felt hollow. It would never be enough, she realized. No matter what she accomplished, men like Morrison would always find a way to diminish it. That night she lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling. She thought about quitting, about going home, finding some civilian job where her gender wouldn't be a constant obstacle. It would be easier, simpler. But then she thought about those moments on the mountain, the focus, the purpose, the knowledge that her skills, her training, her dedication had kept good men alive. That meant something. That mattered. The mission reports made their way up the chain of command. Within a week, Sarah received orders to report to Marine Corps headquarters in Quantico, Virginia. She wasn't told why, only that her presence was requested. The flight back to the States felt surreal. Just days ago, she'd been on a mountain in Afghanistan, looking through a scope at enemy fighters. Now she was in dress uniform, being driven through Virginia countryside to a meeting she didn't understand. She was escorted to a conference room where several high-ranking officers sat waiting. Among them was a 2-star general she recognized from photographs, General Patricia Hayes, one of the highest-ranking women in the Marine Corps. "Lance Corporal Chen," General Hayes said, "please sit down." Sarah sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her heart was pounding. General Hayes smiled. "Relax, Lance Corporal. You're not in trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. We've reviewed the reports from your recent operation in Afghanistan. Your performance was exceptional. 9 confirmed enemy kills at extreme range under difficult conditions. 0 friendly casualties. The SEAL team commander specifically cited your actions as critical to the mission's success." Sarah didn't know what to say. "Thank you, ma'am." "We want to do something that hasn't been done before," General Hayes continued. "We want to feature your story in a series about women in combat roles. Show the American people what female Marines are capable of. Would you be willing to participate?" Every instinct told Sarah to say no. She didn't want to be a poster girl. She didn't want publicity. She just wanted to do her job. But then she thought about other young women who might be considering military service. Women who'd faced the same doubts, the same dismissals, the same people telling them they weren't good enough. Maybe her story could help them. Maybe it could change some minds. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "I'll do it." The media coverage started small, a story in the Marine Corps Times, a mention in a Pentagon press briefing. But it grew. A major news network picked up the story. Then another. Within 2 weeks, Sarah's face was on magazine covers, her name was trending on social media. The attention made her uncomfortable, but the response from young women across the country made it worthwhile. She received hundreds of letters and emails from girls and women thanking her, telling her she'd inspired them to pursue their own dreams despite obstacles. Back at Camp Pendleton, the reaction was mixed. Some Marines were proud, congratulating her on the recognition. Others, particularly the older generation, saw it as exactly what Morrison had predicted: publicity, not merit. Morrison himself said nothing directly to Sarah, but she heard through the grapevine that he was telling anyone who'd listen that the whole thing was overblown, that any competent sniper could have made those shots, that the Marine Corps was just desperate for good PR about women in combat. Sarah tried to ignore it. She focused on her training, her duties, her job, but the comments gnawed at her. 3 months after the Afghanistan mission, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez returned to Camp Pendleton for another joint training exercise. He pulled Sarah aside on the first day. "I heard Morrison still talking," Rodriguez said, "still trying to undermine what you accomplished." Sarah shrugged. "Some people are going to think what they want to think, sir." "Maybe," Rodriguez said, "or maybe they just need to see it for themselves." The next day, Rodriguez announced a special training exercise, a shooting competition between Marine snipers and Navy SEAL-designated marksmen. Long-range shots, multiple targets, variable conditions. The top 5 shooters would be chosen for an upcoming joint operation. Staff Sergeant Morrison volunteered immediately. So did every other senior sniper in the unit. This was their chance to prove that Sarah's success had been luck, that the old guard was still superior. The competition took place over 2 days. Targets at 300, 500, 800, and 1,000 yards. Wind, weather, and time pressure all factored in. Points were awarded for accuracy and speed. Sarah approached it the way she approached everything, with focus and preparation. She studied the range, calculated conditions, practiced her breathing. She didn't trash talk. She didn't boast. She simply did her job. On the first day, she finished in 3rd place overall. Morrison finished 5th. On the second day, as conditions became more difficult, stronger winds, moving targets, Sarah pulled ahead. When the final scores were tallied, she'd won the overall competition by 12 points. Morrison finished 7th. The silence in the debriefing room was thick. Rodriguez read out the top 5 names. Sarah was first, followed by 2 SEALs and 2 younger Marine snipers. Morrison's name wasn't called. After the meeting, Morrison approached Sarah. His face was red, his fists clenched. "You got lucky," he said. "That's all just luck." "No," Sarah said quietly. "It was training, discipline, and doing my job the best way I know how. Same thing I've been doing for 3 years while you've been making excuses." Morrison started to respond, but Chief Davidson stepped between them. "Staff Sergeant, I think you should walk away now." Morrison glared at both of them, then turned and left. That evening, Rodriguez found Sarah on the rifle range. She was cleaning her weapon, as always. "You handled that well," he said. "Did I?" Sarah asked. "I probably shouldn't have said that to him." "He needed to hear it," Rodriguez replied. "Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's still the truth." He paused. "You're on my team for the next operation. We deploy in 6 weeks. You ready?" Sarah looked up at him. She thought about everything she'd been through. The insults, the doubt, the constant need to prove herself. But she also thought about that dawn on the Afghan mountain, about the satisfaction of knowing she'd done something that mattered. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm ready." The story should have ended there. Sarah had proven herself. She'd won the competition. She'd earned respect from the people who mattered. But 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. A reporter doing a follow-up story on Sarah's Afghanistan mission contacted the Pentagon with questions. He'd been investigating the night of the operation and found something interesting. The 8 enemy fighters Sarah had eliminated, they hadn't been random patrol members. According to intelligence reports that had been recently declassified, they'd been a specialized unit, the best fighters the enemy commander had. They'd been returning from placing IEDs along the route coalition forces used for resupply. If Sarah hadn't stopped them that night, if they'd made it back to the compound and alerted everyone to the SEAL team's presence, the mission would have failed. More than that, the IEDs they'd planted would have killed or wounded dozens of American soldiers over the following weeks. The reporter published his findings. Suddenly, Sarah's actions that night took on even greater significance. She hadn't just protected 8 SEALs, she'd potentially saved dozens of lives. The Marine Corps held a ceremony at Camp Pendleton. Sarah was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor in combat. General Hayes presented the medal herself. "Lance Corporal Chen," the general said, "your actions on that mountain exemplified the very best of the Marine Corps. Your courage, skill, and dedication saved American lives. You are an inspiration to every Marine, male or female." The assembled Marines applauded, most of them anyway. Sarah saw Morrison in the crowd, standing with his arms crossed, not clapping. But next to him, several of his closest friends were applauding. Even they could no longer deny what Sarah had accomplished. After the ceremony, Sarah's father approached her. The old veteran had tears in his eyes. "I am so proud of you, sweetheart," he said, embracing her. "You did something remarkable out there." "I just did my job, Dad," Sarah said. Her father pulled back and looked at her seriously. "No, you did more than that. You proved that courage and skill have nothing to do with gender. You proved it to everyone who doubted you. But most importantly, you proved it to yourself." That night, Sarah sat alone in her barracks, looking at the Navy Cross in its presentation case. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The obstacles, the doubters, the moments when she'd wanted to give up. She thought about that dawn shot that had changed everything. Not because it made her famous, but because it proved to her what she'd always believed, that she belonged here, that her skills mattered, that she could make a difference. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Chief Davidson standing there. "We deploy in 4 weeks," he said. "I wanted to confirm you're still in." Sarah smiled. "Absolutely, Chief." "Good," Davidson said, "because when we're out there, I don't want anyone else watching my back." It was the highest compliment she'd ever received, not because it acknowledged her gender or made a big deal about her being a woman in a male-dominated field, but because it simply recognized her as a Marine, a skilled, dedicated, reliable Marine. That was all she'd ever wanted. As Davidson left, Sarah closed her door and returned to cleaning her rifle. Tomorrow she'd be back on the range, practicing, preparing, hunting her skills. There would be more missions, more challenges, more people to prove wrong. But she wasn't doing it for them anymore. She was doing it for the young women who'd read her story and dream bigger dreams. She was doing it for her fellow Marines who counted on her. She was doing it for herself. Because at the end of the day, Sarah Chen was exactly where she was meant to be. A United States Marine, serving with honor, protecting her brothers and sisters in arms, and proving every single day that courage comes in all forms. The doubters would always exist, but so would the truth. And the truth was this. On that mountain at dawn, when it mattered most, a 5'3" Marine sniper had broken an enemy line with perfect shots and brought her team home safe.